You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 83 for April 27th, 2016. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about the differences between large and small CRM firms. What does that mean? Does it matter? Do large CRM firms even exist anymore? So, go look at the lists of CRM professionals at your local SHPO because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Sonia in Utah.
Hello.
Stephen in Calgary.
Hi.
And Bill in Arizona.
Howdy.
So Chris couldn't join us today, and Doug couldn't join us today, which means our outro will be succinct. So anyway, they will be missed, but they did leave some comments, and we'll get to that later. So we're going to split this show up into 3 segments like we usually do. And in this first segment, we're going to define what small firms and large firms and all the different sizes of CRM firms that you could have, and not even CRM firms, environmental firms that you can have. And partly so we can define these terms for the following segments. And also so new people in the business can understand exactly how complicated this business really is. It's not just the difference between a small firm and a large firm. There is a sliding scale of everything in between, and sometimes it's difficult. Just like evolution of species, if you look at the one species doing small incremental changes into the next, it's difficult to actually see that. And that can be the same thing with, a small firm may not even realize they became a large firm or that they became a medium-sized firm or something like that. It could just happen. And then I think personally, we'll get into this, though, in those cases when they're not proactively deciding how big they want to be, that can lead to huge problems from a management standpoint because you end up with people in leadership positions that didn't expect to be and don't want to be and don't know how to do it and things like that. So... But we'll get into that. I want to start this off with a little bit of history. A lot of CRM firms seem to have started when you look at all of you talk to people and you look at company profiles and things like that. A lot of these started in the 70s, usually in the mid to late 70s and early 80s, when the university systems were starting to finally realize that, hey, NHPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, means that we can kind of start doing this and make some money on it. In fact, my thesis was done on a project that grad students had done back in the 70s in Georgia. It was one of the first reservoir projects. They were about to make this huge reservoir. And I think something like 30 or 40 PhDs were given out based on this one reservoir. Everybody chose a project and they did it and then didn't do anything else with it. So, but that was the thing. You get your PhD or you get your master's degree, and you start a company. And a lot of times these were just, friends, one person or 2 or 3 people that decided to, hey, we can make a little money doing this and we can keep doing archaeology and let's just get it going. And this happened all across the country. I think one of the big starts and pushes to this, just from the research I've done, was California. A lot of people over here from the UC Davis and Sonoma State people were starting their small firms, which are still... A lot of them are still in existence today, whether they're still small or they've become larger firms. That's a difference. So when we say small firm, we are talking about something that could just be one person that maybe always works alone or hires people as they need. That's kind of where I'm at right now. Although, like I said, this definition is somewhat on a sliding scale because I've been one person most of the time I've been in business. However, last year I had... for one project, I think I had 9 employees altogether. And then for the next project, I had like 8 employees. And then there's, so what did I consider myself then? Well, I still pretty much from just a business standpoint, I considered myself a large firm. A small firm. So, and just from a technical standpoint too, like how did we operate? How did we think? How did we do things? It was all very sort of small firm attitude. Sonia, I want to throw this to you because you've worked for some larger firms, and then you're bringing up something good in the Skype chat that we can have an actual legal definition, which we can talk about how much I think that's BS for archaeology. But anyway, what would you consider your firm right now, and like how many employees do you have, and where do you see how you fit in this spectrum?
Well, I consider myself a small firm. Desert West Environmental has 2 full-time and 1 part-time regular employee. And then we have probably 8 or 10 on-call field technicians, plus a whole slew now of additional on-call technicians that we can call on as needed, which is fantastic. But the biggest thing for me is basically revenue. Like, how much money do you need to pull in to be considered a small, medium, or large firm? I've worked for companies like A&E firms that are multi-billion-dollar a year firms, but they're architecture and engineering firms. They're not just cultural resources or natural resources. So, but those are considered large firms. Then there's your medium-sized firms, and those are mostly just cultural and natural together, but they make several $1 million a year. And by several, I mean tens of millions of dollars a year.
Right.
And then, of course, your smaller firms like me, who can make anything from 500,000, 200,000 to, well, up to the federal standard, which is like somewhere around 15 million. You're considered a small business if you make up to like 15 or 14 million dollars a year, which, in my humble opinion, is crap. that makes you a hell of a lot bigger than you really are.
Well, and that's one of the things I wanted to mention when you put that in the Skype chat, because, from a federal contracting standpoint, I see that. You're right. I see that all the time. I think I've seen up to 20 million as well on different contracts. And
it varies.
Yeah, and I think at 15 million, well, maybe like 9 million was the lowest I've seen. But anyway, either way, that still covers like probably 90% of the people that do CRM in this country, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's just the standards for what a small business is in archaeology versus what apparently the government thinks a small business is. It really changes things, because when they say a contract is a small business set aside, it doesn't help the people like you and me, because nearly every CRM firm can still bid on that. It's just the larger engineering firms that probably can't bid on that, but almost everybody else can. And it makes it a little bit unfair, I think.
I mean, when your business starts opening offices in multiple states, and you have tons of offices, and
yeah, Sonia.
And you're getting shush. Yeah, just 1.5 other offices.
Sure. Keep going.
Anyway, yeah, you start pulling in a lot more. I mean, the largest project that I ever worked on, and this was not for my own firm, this for what I would consider a medium to large size cultural and natural resources company, was like $7 million. And that was out of one office. $7 million over the course of a couple of years is literally like 45 people in the field solid for a year to a year and a half, plus another year to a year and a half of report writing and laboratory work. That's a lot of money. And that's out of one office or 1.5 offices. And then, I mean, and that particular firm had, I think at that time, maybe 10 or more offices. So I would consider that a large company, or at least a medium to large company. They're not pulling billions of dollars of revenue in a year, but I would consider it large.
Yeah, indeed. And one thing Steven mentioned in the back chat here was, he thinks about the size of a CRM firm in terms of staffing and not revenue. And I think that's what a lot of what we personally do. Because like you said, I mean, in 2013 or 14, I think I did $30,000 in business. And in 2015, I did close to $400,000. And I don't consider myself any larger than I was in 2014, especially since most of that went out in payroll and per diem anyway. But, from a financial standpoint, somebody would consider that being a slightly larger business. But I know that in reality, that's simply not true.
I suppose there's a certain amount of flexibility in that then,
right.
You can grow or shrink, depending on what the current needs are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because of that, I kind of, my personal judgment on what a large or small firm is, and all the sliding scales in between, is one of really two things, because it depends on how you structure your business, is how many principal investigators do you have, and or how many project managers do you have that are full-time on staff, because the number of field techs you have will vary by project. You could get a you could land a huge survey project and have to hire 20 people, but that doesn't really change the size of your firm. It changes the size of that project. But if you've got 3 or 4 project managers on staff, it means you're bringing in a lot of work and you're managing multiple projects. They're each managing multiple projects. That starts jacking up the size of the firm in my mind. And yeah, like you're saying, Stephen, how many specialists do you have? How many do you have a GIS department? I mean, things like that. I mean, I contract out my heavy lifting GIS stuff. I do a lot of the small stuff myself, but I contract a lot of that out. So, there's like we said, there's a sliding scale, and now you're getting up into as well. Let's start jacking it up from small mom and pop shops to slightly larger firms that have offices and things like that. We can also start throwing in universities. You can start throwing in because some universities, I can think of 2 in particular, possibly 3. I know there's a lot more, but just off the top of my head, there's University of Massachusetts has their own CRM firm. University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee has their own CRM firm. In fact, they just bought a large Midwest CRM firm to kind of bring all those people into the fold. And I think Sonoma State has their own CRM firm. If not, they do a lot of stuff. But anyway, and you guys should just say these out loud. You guys are putting a lot in the chat. So
I'm trying to be polite.
Don't do that. We've done this for way too long to be polite at this point.
Yeah, there are quite a few universities, and so the question is, where do those fall in? Well, one example, since working at the University of Arizona, I guess what we do is not necessarily called cultural resource management. However, that's pretty much what I do on a project by project basis. Mm-hmm. For example, right now I work for my advisor works for the Bureau of Applied Research and Anthropology. And every now and then, she gets contracts to do work for different Native American groups, the Park Service, and other organizations. And then we help with the project. She administers it, and then the tribe or the government agency or whatever, overviews our work. Almost every bit of it is stuff that I already learned how to do in CRM. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is the same exact thing because we're fulfilling some kind of need for the agency or for the tribe or for some kind of project that's going to happen. It's not the same as building a fiber optic line or expanding a freeway or whatever, but the core mechanics of what the projects are basically cultural resource management type projects. Now, the university, and I don't know how much, it's also on a project to project basis, takes a massive amount of overhead. So when if we talked in dollar amounts for these projects, they would probably be, moderate one-off cultural resources projects. They're thousands of dollars. I don't really actually know how much they are, but added together, it's, millions of dollars of money that's coming into the university through this organization. But I don't know how much Arizona's taken off the top, and I can tell you it's a lot. Because I know they take about half of all these, when you hear, congratulations, Professor so-and-so just got an NSF grant, or they just got a new amazing grant from NOAA to do research, the university takes 50, 60% of that.
Right. So
these $1 million research grants that go out from the government, a lot of that just goes straight into the university. Mm-hmm. So the overhead's super high, but as far as what we do at Barra, it's very similar to CRM.
So I think you somewhat proved my point, because when we talk about the other segments here, we've got on our second segment, we're talking about working within a small firm and then working within a large firm in the third segment. I think working within those is mostly going to be determined by how many people work there, how many bosses do you have, how many project managers and principal investigators are there, not necessarily what is the value of the projects that they're bringing in. Although sometimes that does correlate, because it'd be hard for a one-person operation to bring in $1 million project from a management standpoint. Not impossible, but more difficult. It's full-time staff. That's what we're talking about here. So you're right. While universities have probably really large amount of money they're bringing in, they might have small staffs. I know the one at University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee has a fairly large staff. I mean, they have a lot of people working for them. But then again, you start bringing other things like university CRM departments can likely hire, and probably do, work study students, not necessarily professional field technicians. They still have to probably follow the rules of state standards for certain projects, but there's probably a lot of stuff that they can have done in the office or things like that are done by work study students getting minimum wage or less. And that's
or free
exactly. Totally. Interns, things like that. Because they play by a different set of rules being a university. But that also doesn't mean that they're not that they're nonprofits either. I mean, they're obviously making a profit.
No. But it's a different kind of profit, right? Because if your overhead is so enormous that you barely get enough to even pull off the project, then how much you're not really making any profit.
Right.
And the benefit is really the prestige of working for those organizations, but I'm not going to go into that whole thing.
No.
The question we should try to figure out that I don't know if anyone here knows is, how are those university CRM departments structured so that they can actually function as a business?
Right.
For a while ago when you had Adrian Pretzelis on here from Sonoma State, he talked about how they built their own curation facility, and they kind of used overhead from their projects to get it going.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it started, from what I understand, they used project monies as the seed money to start the repository, and then since then they've started to take in curation, but they charge enough to make sure that there's some that always goes into a fund, so that if the university tries to take away the funding, they can somehow survive. So that's the question I'd like to know for these university CRM companies or branches. How are they structured so that the university doesn't just treat their income as university income?
I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that the university does treat their income as university income, but there's like a staging point where it gets held for a while, in the separate account. But as far as billing goes, I think there's a weird sort of like separation where you have the university type jobs and then the commercial type jobs, and usually as part of like their accounting, they have to be very careful not to use or like some people will only build towards the commercial things, and other people will only build towards the university things. And it has to do with like the non-competition issues with government employees.
Right. Okay. Well, let's continue defining these. We're going to get into some of these the intricacies of some of these firms here in the next couple segments, but let's list off the other sizes of firms that we know and the other types of CRM firms that you can have. One of those, and I can think of a couple here in Reno, local ones, are environmental firms that have a cultural component to them. And what I mean by that is, they might get a large project where they have to do an environmental impact statement, and they need biology, they need water quality, they need archaeology, maybe they need geology, maybe they need some other stuff, but they have all those departments within, or they contract that out. That's more of an environmental firm that just deal with these sorts of environmental issues. But then you take it a step higher, and those can be really big, by the way. Your environmental firms can be enormous. I was actually contracted by an environmental firm out on the East Coast that's massive to do cell towers here in California and Nevada, because they don't have anybody here. So they're not a large engineering firm, which we're going to talk about next. They're a large environmental firm. So the difference on the next level up is the what you call A&E firms, architectural and environmental firms. Architecture and engineering firms, I think, is what the A&E actually stands for. And these are your AMEC Foster Wheeler. And if anybody didn't know, AMEC was bought by Foster Wheeler, another big, massive firm. So now they're like global dominating firm. I don't actually know who's bigger. And then there's AECOM. There's who bought URS, which was also a massive firm. There's Stantec, Steven's mentioning here. There's a number of them, and they all have those sort of office space sounding names. I think that's how you can tell. Initech.
I guess we'll maybe mention how I've never worked for one of those firms. I've always been the sub of those guys, but I wonder if you ever feel like you're in office space.
I think you do. Yeah,
Yes.
I worked for AMEC on a project out in up in Washington State, and I mean, you kind of do feel like that. I mean, just walking back through to the cultural offices, to the archaeology section. I mean, it's like a maze just to get back there, and you're going through all these cubicles and all these other offices, and it's a lot of white shirts and ties. I mean, it looks like the 1980s in these firms, quite honestly. And it's just.
I was gonna say, is there a little bit of Dolly Parton 9 to 5 going on, or is it just you guys in the parking lot punching a Xerox computer with your bare hands?
Listen, if the firm has 2 or 3 cakes in the break room every week for people's birthdays, and they have casual Fridays, and they have a workout facility, and they have things like that coming in, they're a large firm. Okay. That's kind of the metric right there. I mean, because my idea of having, very few principal investigators or project managers doesn't actually work in that situation, because the cultural department for a particular office may only have one principal investigator. They may only have, 1 or 2 or 3 project managers, but they work for a company that has 50,000 employees. So, that is a large firm because they have a lot of purchasing and buying power.
But at the same time, the archaeology department, if you're talking about, what the archaeologists have access to, sometimes has to function like a small firm.
Right, but the thing is, they can't bid on those projects with a small business set aside of $15 million because the company they work for made $50 billion last year. You know what I mean?
Well, sure,
but
thinking about it in terms of like the quality of archaeology,
right? Yeah, you're right.
The issues they're going to have to deal with are the equivalent of a small firm because they don't have the expertise pool to draw on.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that in the third segment when we talk about working within a large firm and what that actually means, because I think a few of us have actually done that, and we can give you some insights to that. But for now, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about getting a job at a small firm and then working within a small firm, because it's a very different process than working with a large firm. So we'll be back in a second.
Profiles in CRM, a weekly podcast. Ask CRM professionals 8 simple questions. The first questions establish education, location, and experience. The last questions are a reflection of that experience, and the answers will surprise you. Check out the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/profiles. On that page, you can also request to be interviewed for the show. It only takes 20 minutes, and you don't need any special equipment. Let's get back to the show.
All right, we're back, and now we're going to do somewhat of a deep dive into working for and within a small CRM firm. And this is now, when we say these sorts of things, when we get into the large firms, we're going to have a lot of other things to talk about. But with the small one, we almost always just mean archaeology. CRM is a whole suite of things, but we almost always just mean archaeology when we talk about especially a small firm, because that's often all they can handle unless they contract out some other stuff. If they get like a NEPA project or something where they've got to contract a biologist or some other things, they might do that. But typically, you're talking about archaeology. So, Bill, you've sort of wrote the book on getting a job in cultural resource management. What do you think there are some unique characteristics to, if you want to find a job at a small firm, what are some things that you need to keep in mind to do that, and how do you find these people?
Well, wow, that's a pretty big question. First of all, based on our first section, I guess I've only worked for small cultural resources firms. I've worked for ones that had multiple branches in a whole bunch of other states, but I guarantee you they were all classified as small cultural resources firms, unless they were an environmental company. So when it comes to cultural resources, all I know is small ones. The best thing about small firms is they don't usually have like super specialized individuals, or if they do, that person is like overworked. So if they've got a archaeologist that's their GIS guy, that guy's probably overworked trying to do archaeology and GIS. If they have a zoo archaeologist, that person's probably overwhelmed when they have a zoo archaeology component, because they also have to do archaeology. So what's cool is you can figure out a niche or a specialty or something that they don't necessarily do, and you can really position yourself well to do that. So in my case, doing historical archaeology in the West, it was super handy and also needed at most firms because almost everywhere I go, there's all these people who know a lot about prehistory. So there's a lot of people who know a lot about Hohokam. There's a lot of people who know about Northwest Coast or Plateau or Great Basin prehistory, but they wouldn't actually know how to look at a pile of trash and tell you what stuff's from the 50s, what stuff's from the 20s, and what stuff's from the 1800s. Or they wouldn't necessarily know how to look at a bottle base and figure out how old that is to within 10 or 20 years. So if you have one of those skill sets, GIS or historical artifact analysis, or you can identify buildings or stuff like that, those are really handy tools to have. So the other thing about small companies is they're almost always looking for people, and they almost never have the time to do the formal job search. And by the time they make it to Shovel Bums or something, or they're posting something on there, they've already went out and hired everybody they knew or asked everybody they knew if they were available for the project. So it's easier to keep in touch with smaller firms and be on a person-to-person basis and just kind of keep your name in their mind than it is a large company, because larger companies, you have to go through the HR process and you have to go through an online application process. With smaller companies, it's kind of like just the boss saying you'll do, or hey, I really like you, would you like to work for us?
Yeah.
It's just a straight up process. You don't necessarily have to have an amazing resume or all kinds of stuff, because you've actually talked to this person on the phone, or met them at a local conference, or even just giving them some messages on Facebook, archaeology groups. So it's easier to connect with people in smaller companies. So as far as getting hired, you want to have some kind of skill set that they definitely need, and then keep in contact, because the projects come in phases. So they don't have anything for a long time, then magically they got 3 contracts and they need to find people to do the work. So
well, let me add to that real quick, because I've got a real world example for 2 things that you just said. The projects I had last year, everybody I hired, I either personally knew and asked if they could be on the project, or it was only 1 degree of separation. Like, somebody I hired knew somebody and vouched for them, and they hired them that way. Because also one of the things that you're saying, keep in contact with these people, because projects, come and go. I mean, small business owners are wearing lots of hats, and you could send them an email once at the beginning of the field season that says, hey, I'm available, just keep it in contact. And then you have a project that starts in July. I guarantee you I'm not looking back through that email and I've already forgotten about you, right? Like, I literally forgot about you, and I'm trying to do the 19 steps it takes to get this project going. And one of those steps is hire people, and I want to think as little as possible about it. I want to devote as small amount of brain bandwidth to that problem as I can, which sounds ridiculous because your entire project is based on the quality of the fieldwork that gets done. But that's the reality of the situation, is you just simply don't have the time to focus on it like somebody who has a hiring manager, or somebody who, they just give a job to and say, here, hire 100 people for this project. Then that's your job. That's, for a small business, that's not your job. It is your job, but so are 15 million other things.
Yeah, and someone who's looking for a job, that's their number one concern, right? So they care a lot about finding a job. So you don't necessarily have to care about it, because they care, and they're going to keep contacting you and saying, "Hey, I'm ready to work. I'm ready to work. I'm ready to work."
Yeah, somebody who's keeping them in, now not to an annoying level, but somebody who's keeping active with me in various ways. For me, it'd be social media. If I see you constantly posting or commenting on things, you're going to keep your name in my face without actively emailing me every week saying, do you have a job? Do you have a job? Do you have a job? Things like that. So
not every week, but when I was searching for a job, I don't know if anyone knows, but for a while there, I was a janitor. And so after I was done cleaning toilets, I used to go to my laptop that I brought with me to work, and I had an Excel sheet of companies and jobs and things that I'd applied, and where's that whole thing at, right? So some of the time when I was looking for a job, it wasn't like I was just writing resumes and spamming them out the whole time. Part of it was just calling people and saying, hey, I'm still willing to work. Another part of it was calling companies and saying, you know what, I sent a resume in like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Have you guys filled those positions or whatever? Because another thing, it's not like you're getting blown off when you send in a resume and then you don't hear anything back. Projects are like, hurry up and wait. So sometimes the thing doesn't actually go through. Oh yeah, you know what? We're not going to hire anyone till like October because the contract's not working or the client doesn't want to do it or XYZ, right? So if you find that out, then you know, okay, October or September, I need to start calling them again if I need a job. So if you manage it, you know, you can have a lot of different balls in the air, and then just following through with the conversations, giving people calls, noting what you hear about in either a notebook or an Excel folder or something like that. Just managing all that until you get a job. And then even after you get a job, especially if you're a tech, you still need to keep managing all that stuff to know what's going to come next.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dig into this a little more. Sonia, when you need people for work, I assume you're doing a similar thing to me. Have you ever actually put out a job advertisement on a job posting website, or have you needed to do that yet?
I have. We used, when I was working for the large multi-billion-dollar firm that I used to work for, we actually would use like shovel bums. Recently, I put out a call for just on-call field technicians because we received 2 IDIQs, which basically means you can get jobs as long as you're the low bidder. You can get jobs pretty much anytime, anywhere, for any number of acres. So basically, I have, and the basic thing is when you're working for a large corporation, you may have a little bit of time because you have that HR department. But when you're a small business like I am now, I just need names. I need names and qualifications. I can't tell you if I'm going to need 10 field technicians and 1 field director, or if I'm just going to need 3 field directors and 3 field technicians. So when I say like on call, pay ranges can range. I basically put out a call. Just say, send me your resume. I need to get this on file. If you're available, let me know what your availability is. I mean, going through paid services has, especially if you're in a huge hurry, kind of takes a little bit of time because then you're preparing something a little more formal.
Right.
Putting out a call and saying, okay, we've got this pool. I'm just going to start going through. Or I, in this case, hand that stack of resumes off to one of my field directors and say, tell me who you'd like to work with.
Yeah.
Or who's most qualified for the following jobs, and then give them a call.
Or more likely, who of these have you heard of, and which ones should I throw in the trash right now? Because that also happens.
Exactly. Who do I need to round file? I mean, I have quite literally received resumes from people who've gotten a degree in anthropology like 10 years ago and have been working as a receptionist since then.
Yeah.
And I go,
Which kudos to them for wanting to get back into archaeology, but they've got to do a little more legwork to build their skill set up. And you know, that's something we could talk about on another show, but you know, they can't just expect to get a job with a small firm like that.
Yeah.
Or they may not need to do anything to keep their skill set up. They may need to just call Sonia and say, yo, I'm ready to do work. This is what happened in my life. I had, a kid. I had a divorce. I had some kind of something go on. I used to do this. Just give me a chance. I'm willing to do it, right? Then magically their file goes from the anonymous folder to the actual, like, okay, well, we don't have anything now, but when we do have something, we'll put you on the
You're
list.
at the list.
Or, yes.
One of the things that I'd like to remind everybody is when you see, on-call field announcements, just in general, whether they be from shovel bums or from my business or from Chris's business or from any other business, keep in mind what you're saying on your social media or in your comment section, because many times the owners and the hiring staff of these companies are watching.
Yeah.
And, they may not know, because they've put out a call for on-call field staff or a specific job, they may not actually know how much you're going to get paid because, say, it's a wage determination project. So in one state, it could be like $18 an hour, and in another state, it could be $16 an hour.
Yeah.
Who knows? Things change, and it's just keep in mind what you're saying is often watched and seen. I've looked at comments on even shovel bums or on the field tech forums.
Yeah.
And just said, "Wow."
Oh,
Wow.
I hear you. I hear you. It doesn't give me a lot of. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but if I'm looking for people for a job, I'm probably going to post that in the Archeo Field Techs group in Facebook because there are a lot of really good people there. But if one of those common people that constantly comment on this stuff and they're 100% negative like all the time, and they're like, screw CRM and I don't ever make any money and blah 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 blah, or they've ever commented on one of Bill's posts, that's also a thing that will get you
or if it's just me, like, oh, if it's just this loudmouth guy that's always getting people to fight on there, then yeah, he's done.
Yeah, so for future
commenting on Bill's post, so
nice. Well, I'll tell you what, if you've ever commented on one of Bill's posts, then you'll probably have a flag going up for me. So I'm going to have to dig it a little deeper into it. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway.
I'll never get a job.
Is that a good flag?
Right.
I was going to say, I'm in trouble, man. I need all the flags I could get.
I know. But that is the thing, like you were saying, Sonia. If you constantly see somebody and they're always negative, and then you post a job and they're like, hey, can I work for you? I like your firm. And even if they're nice at that point, it's like, well, why? What are you going to say about me when this job is over? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of an influence are you going to be on the other employees? Are you going to bring everybody down? Or are you going to, stuff like that? So, because to me, these people often don't have the big picture, and they're not going to get it working for me either, probably. So,
I go out of my way to try to train people while I'm in the field, not just in the archaeology, but also on how business works.
Yeah.
Like, I want them to know that I am up literally from 6 a.m. or earlier till after midnight every single night, trying to manage projects, get proposals out, organize the field notes or photographs. As a business owner, I'm not so separated from the field work as you might think that I am.
Well, and we're going to move into that in the last 6 minutes of this segment, is working within a small firm. Now that you've got the job, let's say you've got a job with a small firm and you're working within that small firm, there are some things that you need to take into consideration. Like for example, if you're new, working in a small firm might be actually you might have a difficult job getting a job in a small firm because they are looking for people that can wear multiple hats often, that have all these skills. On the other hand, they might be looking for people that are also cheap because they may have bid low on a project or something like that. So who knows? I'm not saying you won't get the job, but either way, once you do get the job, I would say often if your goal is to move up in the business, is to move up to project manager, move up to stuff like that, it could actually be kind of difficult in a smaller firm just because they have very few positions and very little mobility. Unless that firm is rapidly expanding, then you might be able to work yourself into a spot where all of a sudden they need a project manager 2 states away and you have experience over there, so maybe they'll send you over there, and now you're managing the office of for Dig Tech in Idaho. So Sonia, you've got some experience with this. What's your ideas on that?
If you want to move up in a small business, you're going to have to make sure that you are a valuable member of the business. That means supporting other team members, and that's what you are. You're a team. Supporting other team members, encouraging them to learn, but also you need to have several different marketable skills. If you have a PhD in anthropology, a master's degree in anthropology, and a bachelor's degree in anthropology, and you only know prehistoric Great Basin archaeology,
right?
You're going to need to branch out. You're going to need to learn GIS. You need to learn how to market. You need to learn how to maybe, prairie dog monitor, or learn the different types of hawks that are out there. There are a lot of different skills that you can learn as an archaeologist and be basically cross-trained.
Mm-hmm.
So start volunteering for that stuff. And I would say the exact same thing if you were working for a large firm. Start expanding your repertoire, your knowledge repertoire. Make yourself more valuable that way.
Yeah, that never hurts.
It never hurts,
yeah.
Because small companies are limited by the number and the quality of their field staff. And the individuals who have the most or the largest set of skills or the broadest set of skills become a higher priority.
Yeah, and the biggest difference I could see between a small and large firm from a skill set standpoint is at a small firm, your skills will be extremely visible. Like what you know and don't know will be known by everyone. And if you learn something new, or I've got in the notes here to be a self-starter. If you know that your firm is bringing in a project, and a small firm, you might actually know what's being bid on, and it might be discussed with your your employer because they're working in the trench next to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every single one of my crew know what we're bidding on.
Right.
Because I want them to know.
Exactly.
That shows them that we're trying to keep work coming in for them, but it also gives them an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I have a little bit of experience in that. Can I help you?
Exactly. And if nobody has experience in that and your employer really wants to bid on something, you say, hey, I'm going to look into that so we can add that to our list of skills, because you want to stay there and you want to stay relevant. Now, working in a larger firm, your skill set, you could have a more narrowly focused set of skills. I was just talking to a guy at the SAAs who works for a large firm out in one of their bigger offices out in, I think it's New Jersey, and they have 150 archaeologists at that firm. Not like employees, like just archaeologists in the cultural department. And in a firm like that, you could have a very specific set of skills and probably not ever get noticed. And you could always go on historic projects. You could always focus on prehistoric projects, or, something like that. So, but that's a completely different deal that we'll get into in a minute. But the basics here, as we start to wrap up this section, are with a small firm, you're going to be intimately acquainted with the owners, which could be good, depending on who they are. If they're good educators and they're interested in teaching things, you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot about the business of archaeology, because the basic structure of how an archaeological project works is going to be really similar between these two sizes of firms, unless you get up into the big, massive military contracts and government contracts and stuff like that. But yeah, and one thing Sonia's saying here is you have to be teachable. You have to learn how to do new things. You have to, just stay up on all this stuff, and you're going to be a lot more active. You're not going to be able to, in most cases, just go to work from 9 to 5 and keep your head down and do stuff. You're going to be active and engaged, and you're going to be, part of that company. And from my own standpoint, you have to keep in mind that the work you're doing is, your employer, because they're working right next to you, they're walking next to you, they're digging next to you, they're screening for you, they're doing something. Everything you do, they're going to kind of take it personally. They're not going to try to do that, but they are going to take it personally. So if you're standing there, bad-mouthing the company or doing something like that, you're bad-mouthing that person, But at the same time, if you're online saying, I work for this awesome company, they're amazing, they're also in that group too, and they're seeing that. So it's just a way more intimate setting. So, Stephen, why don't you take us out with your comment in the Skype chat?
Well, yeah, one of the, I don't know if it's a benefit or a downside of working for a small firm, but because there are only, it's like you and maybe one other person with any sort of expertise, is that if something comes down the pipe that nobody has an expertise in, you basically have to roll your own. So one thing that, not only do you have to be teachable, but you have to be self-teachable. You have to be able to, know how to figure things out and come up with a workable solution. And so it's, and I would contrast it against large firms where, you get exposed to a lot of different types of depth for, your various subject matter. And so you can learn a lot that way. But in the smaller firms, your learning is going to be more like, a scramble of how do we get that out of the way? How do we get it done?
So the easiest way that I ever realized, only after I'd been laid off and fired a million times, how to survive in a small firm is really, it's like a pirate ship. You guys are all in it together, and the plunder that you get is what you get. And so if you are not adding value, which I have been absolutely guilty of not adding value to my company's bottom line. So by you not adding money to the bottom line, or bad-mouthing people, or not giving your 110%, by not doing what Stephen recommended and learning more about other things that you don't necessarily know about, you are basically not helping the crew. And when you don't get helped on, when you don't help, you basically end up getting mutinied. And that is real. That's happened to me. I know from experience.
Absolutely. All right. So we are going to move on to large firms right after this break. Back in a second.
everyone. This is Christopher Dore with Heritage Business International, and here's this week's Heritage Business Tip from the archive. This week, we look at the relationship between value and price. In the minds of your clients, value equals price. To balance this equation, most heritage organizations focus on reducing price. That becomes a race to the bottom. Instead, focus on increasing value to justify your price. The things you will need to do will make your organization stronger, more sustainable, and much more profitable. To receive our most up-to-date Heritage Business tips, you can subscribe to our free weekly email at heritagebusiness.org. Until next time, this is Christopher Dore.
All right, we're back, and we're going to close out the show by talking about large CRM firms. And Bill had to step out of the room for a second, so he's going to come in and take over where we leave off. But like we did with small CRM firms, let's talk about getting a job within a large CRM firm, because there are differences between doing a small firm. Now, with a small firm, we mentioned just to recap. You've got to make yourself known to the firm. You've got to it's kind of all about who you know and things like that. But Sonia, if you've got to come in this, you can kick in anytime. Okay. But I just go ahead.
Getting hired with a large firm can be exceptionally complicated and in many cases very detached. Like, you'll fill out your application online and there won't be a telephone number to an HR person. There won't be any email to an HR person. There is literally nobody you can follow up with. And these are on some of the larger firms. When you're at a higher level, like a management level, they may approach you because they use headhunters to find people for field crew chiefs. Either you have to know someone, or you basically have to put your name in, get onto an on-call list, and then hope that they call you.
Right.
It's kind of a challenge sometimes to get in with these larger firms.
Well, yeah, and there are some things that Bill has written about that you need to think about too with some of these large firms, like the really large, architectural and engineering firms that like you said, they might actually use an outside firm to do this, or they might have software that helps them weed out the initial set of resumes, because these firms are going to get sometimes hundreds, if not possibly even thousands of applications for a single job, right? So one of the things Bill talks about in a couple of his books are crafting your resume or CV or whatever they ask for. That's also a big thing, is look at what they ask for in the job listing and give them exactly that. Because if you don't give them exactly that, you're instantly tossed into the round file. And now that Bill's back, we're just getting into this job thing. One of the things Bill has talked about is crafting the words that are on your resume and CV to sort of match what's in the job listing, because they could run your information through a program that is going to try to pick out those keywords, and then you'll instantly be pushed to the top of the list because you added those keywords and you added exactly what they were looking for. If they say we need a person to do this, this, and this, then you better put this, this, and this on your resume. Otherwise, you're not going to get the job. So you have to look at the biggest difference I see with getting a job in a small and a large firm is the exposure that they have. When a small firm puts out a job posting, they're probably putting on one of the two common places that we do that, and they're going to get a handful of people, that want to do that job. And it might be a smaller job, it might not pay as much, things like that. There might not be any benefits. Whereas a large firm will often pay more. They'll often have better benefits. There's often the ability to do further work with them, so they're going to be a little more particular on who they hire, which means they're going to get more people that want to work on that job. So. Bill, we've just kind of gotten into this. Why don't you take this up and talk about some of the stuff you've mentioned, about some of the intricacies of getting a job with a larger firm, and, who you need to contact and what do you need to do and things like that.
Sure. getting hired at a large firm is very similar to getting hired at a small firm. However, there's a lot more firewalls and obstacles to actually connecting with the individuals who have the power to hire you.
Mm-hmm.
So we mentioned earlier, I mean, the goal is for you to connect with the individual that might be your boss or your coworkers in a way that makes you look good, right?
Right.
So at a larger company, I think you were mentioning before, it might be a massive corporation, but there's only really one principal investigator and a small group of individuals that do cultural resources. Well, you can connect with those guys and they may totally love you, but then you have to go through the whole HR and all the other stuff. And so there's just a lot of pitfalls. It could take a long time to get hired, and then at that point the project's done, or it's a moot point, or you're actually redundant, which then that pretty much sets you up to get laid off pretty soon, or for the job to not, you've missed your chance to prove who you are. Now you've got to sit there and prove who you are with nothing to prove, or with no projects to help you do so. Or you may be the most personable individual who knows about what's going on in that area, or in the place where the corporation's trying to expand, or you might be the perfect candidate, but you can't write a quality resume, or you don't have X certifications like an MSHA training or some kind of other special training, or you can't pass a drug test. And then, it doesn't really matter. You've done all that work. You've shown that you're a great person, but then these other things actually show that you're maybe not as good as you possibly could be. So, you still want to connect with people, and you still want to try to make a personable impression, but you should just be aware that there's going to be other obstacles, and there's other people that you're going to have to appease. And yeah, writing an excellent resume that is loaded with keywords, that is exactly what the company needs, and then with that little personal touch, because you've done your networking and you know the people who work there, that shows how you can add even more value, how you can go beyond that, right? So you've got this extra skill that's not necessarily called for in the job posting, but it's a direction the company wants to go. It's somewhere that you want to be, and you can try to put that in. That'll get you past the other applicants. And I haven't worked with really huge corporations, but I do know that if you're trying to hire for a project that's 3-6 months long, and you need 8 or 9 people of all different levels, crew chief, tech, maybe even some project directors, you can be assured that there's going to be an applicant pool way over 100 for that job.
Yeah.
And depending on how widely they've advertised it, if they're totally crazy, or if they actually have people who do the hiring, you could be in there with 100 people for those like 4 or 5 tech jobs, right? And so in that case, it's really like you guys were saying, who do you know? So even if it formally goes through the corporation's process for hiring, when it comes down to it, the people who are doing the hiring are going to do their best to try and choose individuals that they actually know, regardless of what your resume says to a certain point. So, the competition could be a lot more fierce. Whereas if they just know you or Sonia, then you probably pass the test, right? They know who you are. You're more likely to get hired. At a big company, you could be in an applicant pool with 1 million other people, and then your boss is trying to say, well, I really know her, I like her, hire her. But they're saying, well, there's all these other people over here on this side, and there's several masters and PhDs down here. Are you sure you don't want to look at them? And it's like, okay, I guess we'll look at them too. And then come to find out one of those people is excellent too, and they get hired.
Indeed. Yeah, and that's all good points. And one of the things we're talking about here is you can have there are some similarities, like you mentioned, Bill, and one of those is making yourself more marketable. A small firm is going to look at how many skills you have and whether or not you're actually good at those things. But a large firm is going to look at the same thing too, depending on the job that you're looking for. One of the things we're mentioning here, if you're looking for just field tech on a project for them, I think at least a few of us have worked with larger firms. I can think of 2 or 3 projects I was on where the only people I actually knew on that project were the 2 or 3 people I was actually on a crew, on a survey crew with, or on an excavation crew with, but there were 30 other people that I don't even remember their names or what they look like. I mean, it was such a large project that I had no idea. And I never met anybody that worked in the home office, or I just work, you'd work with the project manager and then you'd never even see the home office. I've worked for a number of companies where I've never actually been to their offices and I didn't know who was there. I've never met the owner, never met anybody in the upper echelons of that company unless they maybe visited the site, which is also very unlikely. So you can, like we said, you can't do with a small firm. You can in a large firm just kind of put your head down and work and probably never get noticed if you don't want to get noticed. So, Sonia.
One of the things that I found most frustrating about working for a large firm is that they do, as Stephen has mentioned in the notes here, they try to kind of put you into a box, and that you have a hard time climbing out of that box. Mm-hmm. At one point, we were putting in a cost proposal for a project, and they're like, "Oh crap, we need a paleontologist," and I'm like, "Well, I can do that for you." And they're like, "Well, you're not a paleontologist; you're just an archaeologist." And I'm like, I have a degree in geology. I have a master's degree that's specialized in geomorphology. I am a permitted paleontologist in addition to being a permitted archaeologist. Mm-hmm. I can do that work. Well, but you're just an archaeologist. I'm going, well, okay, so what other than, does this mean that you want to just hire another person? I mean, legally speaking, I can't perform both tasks at the same time. Mm-hmm. But what I can do is walk a transect for archaeology and walk a transect, that same transect again, for paleontology. Right. That's separating the two tasks. So I'm like, why hire another person? Probably pay them more because they have a degree in archaeology or in geology instead of archaeology. When you can have one person do the same job equally as well, but separately, mm-hmm. And they really had a hard time separating the fact out that I could do both jobs. And, I do encourage people to diversify their skill set. Make sure that your bosses know that you can do other jobs other than just that one checked box that you have of archaeologist, and keep that in front of them.
That's an excellent point right there, is keep that in front of them, because while you think you're the most fantastic person on the planet, and maybe you are, these people also don't have time to memorize your CV. They'll look at it maybe once, they'll skim it, you'll look at your first page if you did your CV right and get a snapshot of who you are, and then they'll flip through the other pages and be like, okay, but they're not memorizing all that. They're putting you in the pile of people they want to talk to, and they'll talk to you and they'll never look at your CV again. So if you don't constantly remind someone whenever something comes up, and this is how I've kind of moved up, is when something presents itself at a firm, somebody says, crap, we need to use a total station. Does anybody here know how to do that? I mean, I speak up. Yes, I know how to use a total station. I've used one before. Or no, but give it to me for the weekend and I'll figure it out. I also did that one time because nobody was willing to do that. And, and you just have to speak up, and then you'll get noticed. And the more you speak up, even if they don't pick you for that position, or even if they don't pick you to learn something new, or pick one of the skills you have, you spoke up, and you're not one of the faceless people standing in front of them at the tailgate meeting when there's 20 of you and nobody knows who you are. So now on the other hand, if you want to be a faceless person at a company and just do your job and get paid for it and go home at the end of the day and not really think about it, then a large firm is probably the exact place you need to be, because you'll be one of those 150 archaeologists that just shows up to work every day. And some people like that, some people get into that. But if you want to move up, or at least get noticed and do different things, and maybe be called upon to, the firm just got a job in Hawaii, we want to go work out there, which, to get into a side conversation, sounds good, but actually is pretty crappy, because working in Hawaii is not the best thing in the world. But anyway, you might be called upon to do one of those special jobs. Here's another example. I have a friend who works down in the Southeast, speaks fluent Spanish. So he gets called upon to do the work that they have occasionally in Puerto Rico. Even if he's not going as an archaeologist, he's going almost as a translator, because he speaks fluent Spanish. And that's a skill that they know that he has. So I don't know. What are some what are some other things you guys can think of here? I know. Just jump in, because I know one of the things I'm thinking of, at a large firm, you might have other opportunities that you wouldn't have at small firms. Like, for example, the SAA is coming up in Vancouver next year, the Great Basin Anthropological Conference coming up in October. They might pay for you to go if you're giving a paper. They might pay for you to go if you're not giving a paper. Chances are they won't, but if you are giving a presentation on some of the research you've done, that's good advertising for them. It's good science for them. They like that. And they might actually pay your way, and then you'll get one of those coveted government rate rooms, maybe, or one of the conference hotel rooms. I always stay somewhere else because they're $200 a night. But they could actually do that, and it could be a good thing for you to do. Smaller firms might not be able to afford that. I mean, the ones who know it's good for them will try to afford that, but they might not be able to.
Well, you might gear, right? That like the newest, bestest gear. Like the large firms that particularly aren't just archaeology firms, but the A&E firms or whatever, they probably already have digital data loggers for other departments. So it might be an easy sell to, since they already have the infrastructure there, to just kind of glom on and work with them. That's not true of every place. In some of the large A&E firms, like the departments are really compartmentalized. So. But I think one of the biggest selling points of working for a large firm, and whether it's I guess technically medium-sized firm that's would be large but solely archaeology, where you have a lot of permanent staff, or some attached to one of these A&E firms or whatever, it's opportunity that they can provide you with. You have 5 other people who have specialties there, and you'll be able to learn these things to a greater depth than you would if you're just trying to roll your own.
Right.
You have access to, potentially access to, better toys and whatnot, the most cutting edge technology and different approaches. Also, not necessarily on an individual level, but there's a good chance that you can hook on with a larger project, provided that it's something that the rest of your firm got. So if like, your A&E firm got a really big engineering project, you might be able to get in on that, as the archaeology arm. And so that can offer, really good opportunities as well.
One thing I can think of is you might be able to roll over into another position after you decide that you hate CRM, because they are so huge.
That's a good point.
So, not because you do have a degree and you would have experience with the company, maybe you could figure out the way something works that would help you out. Like maybe you could do HR work. Maybe you could do some of the more technical work, like managing those data sets, or do something for multiple departments. If you're just done with being in the field, a big corporation might give you a chance to do something else that you wouldn't have to actually hack your way in from the outside. You'd actually be in the organization, and you could maybe maneuver your way to another department.
Yeah, I hadn't even actually thought about that, Bill. That's fantastic, and I have an actual example of that going the other direction on one of the big projects I worked for probably one of the largest A&E firms in the world. We had a relatively good sized project, and they were having somewhat of a difficult time finding some field techs. It was wintertime, and I don't even understand what the deal was there. But anyway, some of their people from their bio department had no work to do in the winter, and these guys were techs for the biology department, and they came out and were running buckets back and forth and doing a little bit of screening and things like that. So while they don't necessarily advocate that, because they really need to know what they're looking for, that is a way to work. And some of the archaeologists also, cross-populated into the other departments as well. And so you get to, and don't forget to put that stuff on your CV. That's good experience to get, because that adds that other hat to your, to your skill set. But, and like Sonia said, she does a lot of paleontology stuff. So, she's got that skill set, and she lets people know that. Well, we are wrapping up here. I think the 2 biggest things that we've recognized here is, with a small firm, it's a more intimate setting. You might actually learn more without actually trying hard, because you're just intimately involved with the entire process. Whereas with a large firm, you're going to have to be a lot more proactive at learning more. You're going to have to be proactive at demonstrating your skill set and letting people know who you are, because you're going to be a faceless cog in the machine if you don't do that. So anyway, we've covered a lot of stuff in here, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to send it to any one of us. Most of our contact info is in the show notes for the page, on the Archaeology Podcast Network page, archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM-ARC-podcast/83, and you can find the show notes. So anyway, we're going to call it right there, and we'll be back next time with some even more fantastic topics. Thanks a lot. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM-ARC podcast. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for the episode. You can also email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag CRMArc podcast, or you can tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to the show wherever you saw it. If you share CRM archaeology related items on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else for that matter, be sure to use the hashtag CRMArc so the community can see and comment. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Also, please consider donating to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your donations help fund our bandwidth and contribute to our editing costs. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
See ya.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.